Welcome to the Waymaker Fireside Chat podcast, where our purpose is to grow your life and change the world. In this episode, we sit down with Cheryl McKissack Daniel. Lewis Carr is the founder of Waymaker, the Lewis Carr Internship Foundation, the Blueprint Men Summit, president of media sales at BET Networks, and author of Dirty Little Secrets. Cheryl McKissack Daniel is the president and CEO of the largest Black-owned construction company in America, McKissack & McKissack. Today, she'll share highlights of her 30-plus years of experience in the industry and give career advice to Waymaker listeners. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Lewis Carr, founder of Waymaker. And today on the Waymaker Fireside Chat, we have a special guest, Cheryl McKissack, CEO, president of McKissack & McKissack, which is the largest Black-owned construction company in America. So special to have you here, Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lewis, for featuring McKissack in our story.
It is so special to be able to sit in front of you, knowing all of the amazing things that you have done. Can we start off by you talking about your ancestors? I think your company is 115, 117 years old, and how they started in this business. Because for young people, this is just mind-blowing.
Yes, you are absolutely right. Because as you know, most businesses can't make it to the second generation. And I'm fifth generation. And so our company dates back to 1790, when the first slave from our first descendant of our family came here as a slave and was taught the trade of making bricks. His master was William McKissack. Therefore, we have this Irish name. However, we are African American. And he was taught the trade of making bricks. We believe at some point he became free because he gave 365,000 bricks to a very prominent family in Tennessee called the Cheers family. The Cheers family mansion is still standing. And many years ago, it was bought by Saturn Corporation. And so Saturn has restored the mansion, and the mansion still bears the cornerstone of Moses McKissack I. Moses McKissack II was a master carpenter. He was known for building spiral staircases and gingerbread finishes on mansions throughout the South. Most notably, he worked at the Maxwell House Hotel in downtown Nashville, which incidentally, that's where he met his wife, who was a Maxwell at the time, from Maxwell House Coffee. And 6 presidents actually stayed at the Maxwell House Hotel in Nashville. So it became a landmark for Tennessee. Now, Moses II had 7 girls, and then had to, try for the first boy, his 8th child. And the 8th child was a male, and that was Moses McKissack III, my grandfather. Because they wanted girls, sons the entire time, they named him every name they wanted to give a son every time they had a girl. So he's Moses, Edward, John Henry Lewis. He's got your name. Third. And he and his brother Calvin incorporated us in 1905. And so that's where you get the 117 years. But we actually date back over 230 years. And so they incorporated us before there were architectural licensing laws in the state of Tennessee. That did not come into effect until the 20s. So now these men had been in business for many years. If they did not get their architectural license, they were going to be put out of business because they were master builders. They would design their projects and build them. And so they had to get their license. So they went to architecture school through correspondence. And if you can imagine 2 Black men in the South walking up to the state courthouse to take their license, they were told and denied over and over and over again. Eventually, they lobbied the board, and one board member said, listen, let's help these guys out. They're not going to pass the exam anyway. So let us just let them take it. And so they took the exam. And, I find this story just so interesting because there are still government officials today in 2022 who want to deny Black people opportunities. And this was happening now in the 20s. So, 100 years ago. And they took their license exam and they passed it. Then, of course, they didn't want to give them the license, but eventually they had to. And they became the first Black licensed architects in the country with license 117 and 118 in the state of Tennessee. And both of those licenses hang in my office today. We are going to be celebrating 100 years because May 22nd, I believe it is, 2022 is 100 years. So anyway, the company was then passed down to my father, who was an architect, and then he had a massive stroke. And my mother, who had been a housewife for 17 years, had to step in and take over the company. And at the time, women could not get loans from the bank. That didn't happen until the 80s with the Women's Business Act. So a man could get loans, but a woman could not. But my mom was determined to keep the business because she said she had 3 daughters who were all either architects or engineers. And she knew that we were going to come back into the business. Well, my twin sister and I, we had grown up in the business with our father. He would take us to work on Saturdays. From the time we were little, we would walk construction sites. And so we were very embedded in the business, but we wanted to grow beyond Nashville, Tennessee. So both of us left and worked for larger companies, vowing we would never come back and run the family business. For me, that was New York City. My parents brought me here for a play when I was 5. And from that point on, I knew I wanted to live here, have my professional career here. And so I feel as though I'm living the dream. At 5, I said, I'm going to work in one of those tall buildings in Manhattan. I didn't know I was going to build them, but I definitely wanted to work in one of the buildings. And so, I went to work for Weilinger Associates, an engineering firm that designed silos for missiles, and then the Turner Construction. And then one day my mom called up my boss and told my boss, you are quitting. Cheryl is quitting today. And then she called me and told me, you are relieved of your duties on Friday at 5 and you need to fly to Nashville. And I have been with the family business ever since.
Wow, Cheryl. There's so many questions that I could ask you about that journey. As I'm sitting here listening to you, one of the things I'm thinking about, how did you guys survive the Great Depression?
Oh, I know. We survived slavery.
Right.
We overcame.
Slavery was hurdle number 1.
Jim Crow in the deep South.
Right.
My grandfather and his brother, Moses III and Calvin, they had crews working throughout the South. But Black people could not travel at night. They could not stay in hotels. They could not eat in restaurants. So they would travel by day, and at night they would stay with friends. Now, if you can imagine a crew of men building a church, a housing project, and they only see their boss every other month, it was a loyalty and a dedication of the crews that worked for them. And I also have to say, there was definitely the hand of God. They would build churches at cost, and that was their tithing. They built 6,000 churches. And so that's what, I believe the longevity came from. Because most companies can't make it to the 3rd generation. I think it's like 4%.
Right.
And here we are, 5th generation.
Tell us about your academic journey, Cheryl. I mean, how did you prepare yourself to sort of do what you do? Clearly, you're super, super, super smart and intelligent. But did that just happen, or did you have a plan for this academic journey? Tell our listening audience about that.
Well, that is an excellent question. My parents did not play. It was a different day. And Lewis, I don't know, you may remember, we only had 3 TV stations.
Right. Right.
Right. And they would go off at 11 o'clock and your parents would turn them off at 10 and tell you to read a book. Well, my parents always gave Daryl and I, that's my twin sister, always gave us T-squares, Leroy lettering sets, everything associated with architecture. We did not get dolls. We got train sets because we had to put the train sets together. And so I believe that our parents were guiding us to be who we are today. Now, they sent us to private school in Nashville, Tennessee. And our senior year, all of our friends were going to Ivy League schools. We really wanted to go to Ivy League. And my father said, you can go anywhere you want to go, but I'm only paying for Howard University. And so his vision for us, I thought was terrific. Because here we were, we integrated this white school in Nashville, Tennessee, at the age of probably 6. And by the time we graduated from high school, maybe there were 7 Black people in a class of 100. And now we're being thrust into this wonderful Black experience at Howard University. And it was extremely grounding. For the first time, I had Black teachers. And they really cared about my well-being. You know, at Howard, you became the children of the teachers. You weren't just a number. In the engineering school, because there were only probably 4 or 5 women, all the professors really took a special interest in our education, and they guided us. So when I graduated from undergrad, my mentor, Dr. Broom, he said, Cheryl, you are master's material. I'm putting you in the master's program. End of story. You are not going out to work. And that was good too, because we had a consortium with MIT and Hampton. So during my master's, I would spend a certain amount of time at MIT with a Black professor there, which, you know, MIT and Howard, you know, one is the Black Mecca and one is the Ivy League Mecca. And that experience was incredible. Howard prepared me for everything. So we would have speakers, you know, the type of speakers we would have at Howard.
Right.
It was
did your father go to Howard? Why was he insisted that it was Howard? Did he go to Howard?
He went to Howard. He built the Q sundial. He was part of that. But he loved historically Black colleges. And he put his money where his mouth was. You know, I have 2 daughters. I was not successful in that. But I can only tell you the experience and the grounding Howard University gave me.
Well, sure. This is so interesting to me because personally, I have dabbled in real estate. I was a landlord for a long period of time. I've built houses, or I've paid for houses to be built. And I know just being in the process is very, very difficult. You got to be very detailed. You got to stay engaged and be involved. And I say you got to be coachable. As one of my builders told me, he draws it, Lewis. I build it. All right. Okay. Just understand. All right.
Yes.
So
yes.
I'm really interested in this because along the way, you've heard that African Americans are only good at this field. You've heard that minorities are, for example, one of the things I've heard is that Polish people are great carpenters. All right. They do great carpentry work. You've heard that Hispanics are great drywallers and things like that. You've heard that Black people are great bricklayers. They can
Yes.
really understand the structure. So is any of that true or not?
No, we are great designers. Oh gosh, I'm lost for words now. The Black guy, Peter. Oh gosh, related to Vernon Jordan's wife. He was the architect for Washington, a Black guy. My grandparents, they built the Tuskegee Air Force Base. They were the designers and the builders. We can think of the Black architects who built the beautiful homes, designed the homes out in L.A. in Beverly Hills. And his name was Paul, and I can't pull up his last name.
I stumbled across him late one night. I found a documentary that was on him, that he had built all these homes in Beverly Hills, and I was just like, huh, a Black guy?
Yes. Yeah, I have his book. Look at David Adjaye. He built the African American Museum, and now we have him slated to be the architect for the Affirmation Tower, which will be the tallest building in Manhattan. And his inspiration for that building, by the way, was pics. He went and studied hair pics of his African ancestors. And so when you see the building, you see these spikes going up. And so it's the creative thinking is definitely there among Black people. And it's interesting you bring this up, Lewis, because this happens all the time. One of the services that we provide on our very large projects is MWBE compliance. And what will happen typically, a large architect will come in and say, we have to do all the beginning work because none of these MWBE firms can be creative. And it just sends me to the moon. It sends me to the moon. And I say, no, the laws in New York are clear. It's MWBE for every phase of a project, every part, every phase, because if you start getting behind in the beginning, you'll never make up the numbers at the end. And so that thinking still occurs. I had a developer tell me just 2 years ago, he was trying to team with McKissack because we had the experience with the Dormitory Authority of New York. They didn't. And then he wanted to put all his staff in. And he said, well, you work with Turner, but you don't actually do the work, do you? Like, yes, we actually do the work. We're running Terminal 1 right now. We have the lead person on the program management for Terminal 1. And we're overseeing the capital program for the MTA. $52 billion, 25 people that oversee every project that's over $100 million. So yes, we actually do the work.
So Cheryl, tell the audience about some of the big projects that you guys have done that we all have seen but didn't know it was you.
Well, I think about it in defining moments. So, which project propelled us to the next level? And so when I think about that, the first project that really took us to another level was the construction of Medgar Evers College. And that's in Brooklyn. And, it's quite interesting. We talked about tithing earlier. For many years, I lived in Philly, but I went to church in New York. And I went to church in Brooklyn. So my Sunday was waking up at 8, driving 2 hours, going to church, being faithful there. And then my first, big defining moment comes in Brooklyn. So I think there's a correlation there. So we were developing a joint venture with Turner. And the president of the school, Edison O. Jackson, said, I am going to have a Black lead build my, new campus, or I'm not building it. He did a Maynard Jackson inside out with all the elected officials, CUNY, you name it. And so Turner because I had worked for them, I had a long relationship with them. They said, okay, let's flip the script. Let's make this McKissack Turner. So why is that significant? Because many times we work as sub-consultants to these large companies, and you get the comment that I told you about earlier. Well, you're a sub-consultant. Turner's running everything. And, and I don't mean to single out Turner, because I've worked with Skanska. I can go on and on, and I've worked with all of them. But the outside looking in will say, you did not run that project. Turner ran it. And even Turner will say, no, McKissack was a significant partner to us, and they don't want to hear it. So now when the script is flipped and it's 51-49 McKissack, it gives us better leverage to use a project in our repertoire and say, this is something that McKissack actually built. We were the lead on it. And so that to me was a very good defining moment. It was probably a $300 million effort. And it was a very successful project. And this was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So from there, we went to Atlantic Yards, again in Brooklyn. And I'll never forget, I go into Forest City Radnor's office and I meet with Bruce Radnor, and then I meet with the head of construction. And Bruce Radnor was very dedicated to the fact that he wanted people from the community, Black and brown people, in leadership roles. But they had already given the arena to a large firm. So I meet with the guy in construction and I said, okay, so you've given that away. What else do you have to do? So he said, we have to move all the rail at Atlantic Yards to make way for the new arena. So I'm like, well, we can do that. He said, you can. Now, I had worked as a sub-consultant to another company for the MTA for like 5 or 6 years. And that's about all I knew about rail. I didn't have really any staff who knew anything about rail. And this was like on a Thursday. On Monday, when I came into the office, I had these long documents. They went across the entire conference room, the table. And I'm like, well, what is this? And so my assistant, she's like, it's about 150 pages. And they want you to give an estimate next week. I'm like, huh? So this is the Howard resources kicking in. You know how to angle. If you can get through the bursar's office and register for your classes at Howard University, you can do just about anything. So I just got on the phone. I started making contacts, and I met with a couple of people. I got some of the best couple of good guys to come in that I had known from the MTA. They came in. We got a little extra time from Forest City Radnor, and we put in a proposal and a cost for the project a couple of weeks later. It's kind of like one of those glass cliffs, because they give you this insurmountable opportunity, but I don't think they think you can really do it. Like, you asked for it, here it is.
Wow.
And so being able to pull that off, our first contract was about $230,000. But I would go to the meetings and I would sit there and in the beginning. So for the first year, I would just go to the meetings in Brooklyn. And the head guy over construction would say, well, we need, this piece done. I said, McKissack can do it. I just kept saying, McKissack can do it. McKissack can do it. I want to say when we ended that contract, it was $20 million in fees to McKissack.
Wow.
And we moved all the rail for the Atlantic Yards to a temporary location. And then later came and built a permanent location. We moved the Carlton Street Bridge. I'll never forget, they're like, who's going to move this bridge? I'm like, McKissack can do it. Oh my God. I'm telling you, you're talking about hot flashes. We had to get that bridge in place for Jay-Z to open his first concert. And it was a pressure cooker. We were working around the clock, but we got it done. We got it done. And so when people say, are you really working? Like, yeah, I hadn't slept in a week. I'm really working. Because I believe that, if it's in the construction arena, I can figure it out. I'm a civil engineer. It's all about solving problems. And that's what I like to do.
Tell us about the LaGuardia Project.
So LaGuardia was the first design bill that New York City put in place. So more of a public-private partnership. And so there were some missed opportunities, I think, with respect to MWBE. Our role was providing construction management services, but our role was greatly diminished. And so, while I'm very proud of what was accomplished out there, it's kind of bittersweet. But I can say that is when I ran into Jim Reynolds and Magic Johnson. So the governor, trying to right all the wrongs, because he really was committed to MWBE, at the end, he said, we've got to get a minority partner as part of the development team. And that was JLL, which was a partnership between Magic Johnson and Jim Reynolds. But because Terminal 1 was coming up, which was a much larger project, now Jim and Magic were in a position to put in a proposal with Carlyle Group for Terminal 1. Now, so they were part of it, Terminal 1, at the very beginning, as opposed to LaGuardia being stuck in at the end. And this is where you create this ecosystem for Black businesses. So in the very beginning, Jim Reynolds and Magic Johnson said, we are 30% committed to MWBE on every phase of this project. And he said, Cheryl, I want you to be our program manager. And so, that was like, oh my God, this is like how it operates in the other world. And for the first time, this is how it's operating when BIPOC individuals are in control. And I'll never forget, we were awarded the contract. We had our first meeting. I sat in that room and 80% of the people were of color for what is now a $9.5 billion new Terminal 1 at JFK. And quite frankly, this deal at JFK, it was the ability of Jim Reynolds, along with Carlyle, to negotiate with the city and state of New York to build this building. And this is going to be so impactful. Now, if you think $9 billion, $3 billion is going to MWBE and service disabled veteran firms. And,
Wow.
and they're not moving on that. They're not wavering on that. Matter of fact, there are penalties in place if that doesn't happen. And we're leading that charge. And so this is what we're talking about when we talk about Affirmation Tower, that is 80% owned by Black people. We're talking about the NAACP corporate headquarters there. And, on Wall Street, there's this big buzz about ESG, environmental, social, and governance. So we're in our presentation, they ask us, well, who's going to rent at those rates? And we're like, everybody, because they get MWBE points for a line item that's probably the most expensive they have, New York real estate. And so Don Peoples, who put this team together, I think it was brilliant to be able to say that when you rent in our building, you are getting MWBE points for at $190 a square foot.
Wow.
Yeah, right. It's huge. And so, I mean, these are just some of the projects. So from, uh, I call it Jay-Z's house, um, from Barkley Arena, where we ended up becoming experts in rail. We then were able to win the independent engineer for the MTA, and we are the prime. And we have been overseeing the capital program for 12 years. 12 years. And so it's probably 150 to 100 projects that are over 100 million. Second Avenue subway, East Side access, extension of the 7. All these projects. We do a deep dive, and we look at budget and schedule and sort of do an operational audit and report into the board on each of these projects. And then we oversee another 400 projects with, depending on, if it's critical, like a stoplight kind of report. So, if it's no problems, it gets a green light. If some problems, it gets a yellow light. But this is a McKissack project. And, we just got another extension through 2023. So, and of course, with the infrastructure money that's coming to New York, the MTA is going to benefit greatly from those funds.
Well,
so these are our projects.
Congratulations. So, we here at Waymaker, we believe that every successful person has had Waymakers in their life. Tell us about some of the Waymakers in your life that have helped you.
Well, it starts with my mother. She did not have a degree in engineering or architecture, but she was a smart businesswoman. She's very strong. And as much as I did not like her telling my boss that I was quitting, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because I came back to the family firm. And she taught me how to sell business. I'll never forget. We went down to Alabama, and we walk into the school. It's like school district, the head of construction. And we get in. Mom said, "You're going to give the pitch today." I'm like, "Huh?" So this guy is sitting there. His head is down. Won't look up at me. His face is like a road map. Of course, he's a white guy. And I'm scared to death. But I go ahead because I'm more scared of my mother than I was of him. And I give him a McKissack pitch. He never looks at me. Then he gets up. He says, "Come here, little lady." Go over to him. And he says, "I absolutely want to do business with your firm." And so I was shocked. So I get out to the car because my mom and I would drive everywhere. And we got to the car. She said, "That's a lesson for you. Never judge a book by its cover. You are expert in who you are, and you go up and you tell everybody what we do. I don't care if you think they're listening. I don't care if you think they're interested. You have your TED Talk, so to speak, ready, your elevator pitch ready, and you tell everybody." And that's what I did when I came to New York. I had a desk with a friend in her office, 57th Street, but I told everybody my story. I told them about my ancestors. I didn't have one project in New York City, but I had projects all over the South. I told my story. And people love the fact that in America, people like us can overcome. They love it. They love that.
So Cheryl, let me ask you this question. What do you think are the key attributes that are in common for anybody who's going to be a success? What are some of those key variables, elements that, I don't care if it's me, you, and that people have or need to have to be a success?
I think education is important because education gives you confidence. Okay, so you no one can talk to me about construction in New York and I not be able to go toe to toe with them because I'm educated. And confidence is like number one. I mean, sometimes, there have been times where I wasn't as strong as I am right now in my confidence. But I always was able to get up every morning, shake off a bad situation, a bad conversation, a bad comment, and say, Cheryl, you can do this. And so you have to believe in yourself. I have to sell to my banks, the bonding company, my employees, my board, and then I have to sell business to the outside. And so that confidence factor is, I think, very key. The other thing is I don't focus on a lot of things. I have one or two things I'm trying to do, period. And I put all my eggs in that basket. If right now my number one thing is to work on the new Trans-Hudson Tunnel between New York and New Jersey, that's what I put all my energy in. I attend every seminar. I talk to everybody who has anything to do with it, and I let them know I'm here for business. I think, there was a time I wanted to check the box on a bunch of things for the day. Hey, 90% is still an A. And so that's what I go for. And I go for the 20% that's going to make 80% of the difference.
Wow. So education, confidence, focus. That's great. Cheryl, talk to your 21-year-old self now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Give yourself some advice at 21. Don't waste your time hanging out, Cheryl, because New York is busy. But then I have to say, that's how I've met a lot of people, by going out, by going to the events, by going out to dinner. I would also say, you can do this. And the future is bright. The opportunity is huge. Just stay in the game. Stay in your lane and stay in the game. And your future is bright. To me, it's consistency. Consistent on the things that I just told you. Being consistent with that. I don't worry about a whole bunch of the small stuff. I have now learned, and I would tell myself that, who was 21, I have learned all those things work themselves out. But you have to stay focused on what you're doing. You got to shoot for the stars. If That's
you don't
great.
shoot for the stars, you may not get one, but you'll be with the moon, right?
Absolutely. Final question, Cheryl. You are a wife, a mother, an extremely successful businesswoman. What do you say to people who said that women couldn't have it all?
I say that is absolutely not true. And I'm also a caretaker to my mother.
Oh, wow.
So what is interesting about what happens when you have all this responsibility is kind of like you're able to take on even more responsibility. So, if I could get through having toddlers and at the same time running a business, I don't know, whatever else was out there that I needed to do, I got through it. So once I got through that, everything else is easy because my kids are grown, my husband and I are in a groove. And so now everything else is easy. But back then, yes, it was long nights, 12 o'clock washing clothes and still having to catch a 6 o'clock train to Philadelphia. Those were my everyday occurrences. But I was younger then, and I could do it. But women, we persevere.
So sure, how did you build that capacity? I said that was the last question, but I'll ask this one. How did you build that capacity to do it all, both physically, emotionally, mentally? How did you build that capacity muscle?
They do these attribute kind of tests. And, so they tell you like, what are your, strengths? And one of my strengths is responsibility. I just don't mind taking on the task. If I say I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And I wanted kids. I wanted a husband. I love my mother, and I want a business. So that's how you build that muscle, a little bit over time. When I was in college, I was both in architecture school and engineering school, 23 credits.
Wow.
A semester. And engineering's totally different than architecture. Engineering is numbers, calculations, things like that. Architecture is in the design studio at night, designing and drawing. And I was partying at LA Cafe. So over time, I just built that up.
Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for this conversation. Your journey has been inspiring and amazing, and our listening audience is going to be thrilled and motivated by this particular conversation. So we want to thank you for joining us today, and I wish you continued luck and success on all of the projects that you're doing in the city that never sleeps, New York City. So thank you, Cheryl McKissack, for joining us at the Waymaker Fireside Chat.
Thank you so much for listening to this conversation between Louis Carr and Cheryl McKissack Daniel. What did you enjoy about this episode? Let us know on our social media at Waymaker Culture. Don't forget to claim your first 6 months of the Waymaker Journal free at waymakerjournal.com. And be sure to enter the Waymaker giveaway by going to waymakercontest.com. Subscribe to the Waymaker Fireside Chat podcast to get notifications each time we release an episode.